All right, here we are. I'm Dave Spaeth. This is Dave's World, and this is a new thing that we're going to try, talking with Uncle Mike. Uncle Mike likes to, I'll let him introduce himself, but he likes to call himself the analog man in a digital world, and he's trying to understand things a little bit better. So, Mike, go ahead and tell people a little bit about yourself.
Well, I am the analog man in a digital world. I am Uncle Mike, and Dave's the smartest guy I know, so I'm going to pick his brain, trying to, get a little bit more information, a little bit more of understanding, in my brain on certain topics.
Right. And the first topic that we decided to, you decided that you wanted to try and understand better is evolution.
Yes, sir.
So, you and I have already watched a ton of various content regarding the topic of evolution. A lot of it has been from Forrest Valkai, who is a wonderful biology educator here on YouTube. And we've already watched a ton, so I kind of want to start this off by just, what kind of questions do you already have? What are the things that you think are still things that you don't quite understand about evolution? Let's start there.
Well, actually, there was so much information that we got from those Valkai shows, tapings, that a lot of it didn't stick. I'll be perfectly honest with you. A lot of it didn't stick.
It can be overwhelming. It's a lot of jargon, and even though he does try to break it down fairly simply, breaking through some of those different terms, right, it can be difficult. So let's start with the theory of evolution.
Let's start with a theory, an idea, a theory, a law, or whatever.
Yeah, let's define some terms here, right? That's a good. So in science, it's important to understand that theory is the highest level that any idea can be elevated to according to science. There is nothing higher than a theory. So it's a lot of people misinterpret, misunderstand, or misrepresent the word when talking about anti-evolutionists or creationists, that it's just a theory, right? Using it the colloquial way when we talk about, I have a theory that this might be the thing, right? Like, that's just kind of how we use it in common conversation.
Right.
But that's not how it's used in science. In science, when you say something, a theory is a collection of established facts. One way to look at if something is a theory, for it to be wrong, it would completely undo the foundation of its area of science.
Oh, okay, so like the theory of relativity.
Right. If relativity, the theory of relativity, were to be proven wrong, it would completely undo our understanding of science. Now, the theory of relativity does have limitations. We know that relativity breaks down at the quantum level, right?
Okay.
That's getting into some way advanced science. But again, that's included in the theory of relativity. It has its limits, and its limits, we know, break down at the quantum level, because quantum entanglement, and that gets really confusing. Has nothing to do with evolution, but just establishing what we mean when we say theory. We're talking about something that is very, very hard proven with evidence, and usually it's not even just a single idea, it's a collection of understanding, right? So that a theory, again, highest level a scientific idea can be elevated to, okay? Hypothesis would be more akin to how we use theory colloquially. I hypothesize, I predict that this would happen under these circumstances, and a proper hypothesis is testable. You can come up with some way to confirm whether or not this idea turns out to be true or false. And then if you go through testing and the data show something different than what you expected, you then go back and revise your hypothesis. That's part of the scientific process, or the scientific method, right? So hypothesis would be the better word for the colloquial use of the word theory, if that makes sense.
I'll take your word for it.
Now, you did also ask, what is a law? Right? Now, laws tend to have mathematical formulas associated with them. That is one thing that somewhat separates them from theories. It is, like, for example, the law of relativity is E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. That is the law of relativity. The theory of relativity is the explanation for why that happens, for why energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. That's the theory of relativity, the explanation.
Okay, I'm following that so far.
So the theory is the explanation. Law is like your mathematical formula. You can plug this into that and always get this. It's always, energy the energy output of a system will always equal the mass times the speed of light squared.
Okay. That's the long division part of the theory.
Right. Well, and the law of relativity is encompassed in the theory of relativity, right? So, like I said, theory is the highest level that an idea can be elevated to, and it encompasses all of the evidence, all of the laws, all of the whatever that is associated with that theory according to the evidence we've collected. Okay. So we've talked about hypothesis, we've talked about laws, and we've talked about theories, and we've kind of separated how those are different, but they all work together, right? It's all part of the scientific method.
Right.
And we have learned these things to be true through repeated testing and revision of hypotheses and revision, and theories can be revised, right? We revised the theory, or at least we revised the theory of relativity slightly when we learned that it doesn't apply when you get into the quantum mechanics, right? So we revised the theory of relativity to include its limitation when we learned that, when we went deeper than Einstein did with it, scientifically. So let's bring this back to evolution, though. Now that we've kind of established these terms this way, natural selection, right? The theory of natural selection. We know and have proven and can demonstrate through repeated scientific testing that environmental pressures. Let's go. I'm getting ahead of myself. So, the definition of the theory of evolution. Evolution is any change in the heritable traits, and this is something you've heard Forrest Valkai say, he uses this one repeatedly in his scientific videos.
Okay.
Any change in the heritable traits in a population over time, or over multiple generations.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right? So, an individual doesn't evolve, a population does. A population will have traits that make it either more likely or less likely to survive and reproduce based on those traits. And those traits tend to be, as we've discovered, survival of the fittest, right? The more fit you are for your environment, the less you need to change. You don't have to adapt that much. And that's one of the reasons why, I'm not going to, we wouldn't say humans are done evolving, but we have reached a point where we are shaping our environment to ourselves rather than ourselves to our environment. So there's not a lot of need for us to adapt anymore. with the exception of how we may or may not need to adapt based on the environment that we create for ourselves. But we sure as shit aren't limiting our ability to reproduce and populate this planet. So, like, I'm not saying there's a peak of evolution. There is no peak because there is no goal. Evolution doesn't have a goal. It's just these creatures are more fit in these environments than others. I like to look at sharks as a really great example. Basic shark biology hasn't changed in millions of years because they are already perfectly fit for their environment. There's really nothing better than them out there. The only reason some of the really large sharks died off was because they required very large prey and the biomass dropped, right? There's just less biomass in the oceans than there were at the time of these giant creatures, right? Yeah. So things like the megalodon, they died out, sure, but things like the great white, which existed at the same time as megalodon, didn't need to go anywhere. It stayed, and things like whale sharks that are still massive, they feed on krill, which is a completely different environment when it comes to taking in biomass and feeding themselves than a predatory shark. They're filter feeders, right? So again, they just haven't needed to change. The environment of the oceans does not change much. It's relatively stable until we come along and fuck them up, because and now that's why we're seeing more extinction events, because we are changing the environment, not just to suit ourselves, but at the impact and expense of others. So, you know, a creature that cannot adapt quickly, sharks being included, because they haven't needed to change much. They don't have a lot of natural defenses against any change that we would create in the oceans.
The giant plastic litter about the size of Texas.
It's bigger than that now. Yeah, the great plastic island in the middle of the Pacific Gyre. Yeah. Yeah, that's fun oceanography conversation too. Just how the tides work and how currents work and why it's all accumulating in that area. But back to evolution. So we talk about natural selection being the mechanism for evolution. When we say evolution is any change in the heritable traits in a population over multiple generations. Right. Natural selection is the mechanism by which those traits are selected. Natural selection is non-random selection of random mutations.
Non-random
selection of random mutations. Right. So if you have a trait that pops up in a population, right, and that trait makes it easier for that creature to survive, then it's not random that the creature survived. It's the fact that it was just better suited for its environment. The environment dictates what traits make it and what traits don't.
True, but the whole tribe or whatever.
Right, because this is talking about these traits being passed along a population through multiple generations. Right. So, for example, let's say we have some mice, right? And you have white mice, and you have a white-furred mouse, a black-furred mouse, and a brown-furred mouse. Okay? The black and brown-furred mouse are probably going to be a little bit better camouflaged than the white-furred mouse out in the daytime when predators are about, right? Sure. Okay? And so the white-furred mouse is just going to stand out, right? But what about when it's snowing?
Yeah.
When it's snowing, the white-furred mouse is going to blend in better to its environment for predators. Oh, sounds like you turned your microphone back on, and I'm getting feedback.
Better?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, I turned it off.
Yeah, it's off. Yeah, no, I'm not. It's not feeding back to me again.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. So the white-furred mouse will blend in better in the snow, and then the brown and black-furred mice will be standing out like a sore thumb.
Right.
Right. So the environment is dictating which of those mice survive, and heck, we can even see seasons affect that. Right. The environment actually changes over time. So the population has actually developed multiple fur colors because they might be reproducing not the same season that they were born. Right?
True.
So like the environment can literally change seasonally to affect what traits in a population are better suited for the environment.
Okay. I get that.
Right? So,
I got that.
yeah, because the white mice will be surviving better in the winter, but the brown mice will be surviving better in like the fall, and the black mouse probably survives better at night.
True.
Right? Like just in general, like at night, it's a lot harder to see because it's just got black fur.
Black.
Right? So these are heritable traits that could be beneficial in different environments at different times of day even. And that population will thrive or not if it passes on the traits that help the population continue to pass on traits.
Got it.
That's basic evolution at work, right? It's just like, even just the fur color.
Generations.
Yes.
Okay.
And over multiple generations, the traits that tend to survive or not will depend on the environment that they are in.
Right. And it will stand out. It'll be like, okay, we know this one, the traits worked out for this mouse.
Camouflage is a really easy trait to point to for demonstrating this concept, right? But this concept applies literally to every trait. It's not just about what helps you survive. It's what helps you survive long enough to reproduce. So of course there are sexual selection traits. The peacock being a great example, right? They have a species where the females select for whichever male has the most spots on its tail feathers, right? And they do these display dances and stuff like that, and that behavior is part of their genetics. They are genetically coded to behave that way because doing it helped pass on genes, helped survive and reproduce. And doesn't even necessarily mean about survival. Once you've passed on your genes, once you've reproduced, technically you are no longer necessary for the process on the scale of evolution and natural selection. Right? Although we do have many species, ours included, that are capable of producing many offspring over the course of our lifetimes. We don't just reproduce once and that's it. We don't just like drop a clutch of eggs and then die. Right? Like the octopus, for example. Right? Mm-hmm. Female octopus, they will starve themselves to protect their eggs while they're incubating and hatching, and then their bodies die, and their mother's body is the first thing baby octopuses eat.
Oh.
I don't know if species. I know that is with specifically the Pacific giant red octopus. That's part of their life cycle. Once they reproduce, they die.
That's pretty rough.
Yeah, but they also only reproduce once in their life, and they do a lot before they get there, right?
Yeah, for those, eggs.
Uh-huh.
Do a lot.
No, I'm just saying, like, they live a full, healthy life, and then they're like, okay, I'm going to reproduce and die now. I'm going to go get laid and then die. And then the males keep going on. It's just the females that go through this.
Wow.
This is specifically, like I said, it's the giant, or the Pacific giant red octopus. I don't know that all, in fact, I'm fairly certain not all octopus species have this trait. Okay, so we kind of covered some definition of terms. We covered what evolution is, right? Is the change in heritable traits over the course of multiple generations in a population. And we talked about the mechanism by which that happens is natural selection. Questions?
An idea.
I mean, an idea is, I would say, probably the precursor to a hypothesis.
That's
so
all the math, correct?
Well, I mean, technically, everything is an idea. Anything that is non-tangible that we have come up with is an idea. Numbers are an idea. So, like, idea would probably just be the basic building blocks of any and all of this. Any kind of theory, hypothesis, law, whatever. Ideas are just where we start as a people.
Okay.
Right? Because you can have a lot of ideas, but, not all of them would be a hypothesis. I might be like, I have an idea that dragons are cool. I mean, that's not really something I could ever test it's more of an observation, but it's a personal observation. The scientific method itself does start with observations. For example, let's look at like Newton, right? The story of the apple falling, and I mean, obviously it's allegorical. I don't think that there was any actual, like, an apple falling and hitting him on the head, and he's like, oh, gravity. Like, that's not how that really went down, but it's a fun story.
Yeah.
But I would say, the theory of gravity, which is something that has been elevated all the way to the point of theory, started with an observation, right? The observation was things fall to the ground. Well, a hypothesis might be, maybe things fall to the ground because they've got a little propulsion system in them that we don't see. Like maybe like the apple has a rocket in its stem or something, and it's pushing it down towards the earth. That's a hypothesis. How can I test that hypothesis? Well, I could examine an apple and search for any kind of propulsion system, and then I would learn my hypothesis was incorrect. I was wrong about that. Okay, I need to revise my hypothesis. Well, maybe it's because magnets. Maybe there's like a magnetic attraction because of the iron in the apple. I could test the iron levels of the apple. Oh, wow, there's not really a significant amount of iron in apples, so that's not it, right? Like, this would be an example of, okay, I've made an observation, and I have come up with a hypothesis that might be an explanation for why this is happening, and I come up with ways to prove myself right or wrong. And most of the scientific process is proving yourself wrong until you revise your hypothesis to the point where you stop proving yourself wrong. To the point where, oh, okay, this one keeps checking out over and over again. I keep failing to falsify this hypothesis. I can't prove it wrong. And that's when you start looking at something becoming a theory, right? When it gets to the point where it has been so tested over and over again in different ways, and we can't prove it wrong. It still keeps proving itself to be correct. And that is how you get elevated to theory, is a hypothesis that just keeps tested and testing and testing and testing, and data is collected and it's revised and perfected to the point where it's like, this is just what it is, and we cannot prove ourselves wrong. And all of the stuff that we have done to try to prove ourselves wrong, if we found out that it was then proven wrong at a later time, it would be like, damn, okay, that really changes everything we understood up until this point. Right? And that's the same thing going on with evolution. Evolution, by the mechanism of natural and even artificial selection, because we can talk about artificial selection next, has continuously proven itself impossible to disprove. Right?
Yeah, right.
Because guess what? It keeps happening. We keep observing it. You know, you even have people saying, oh, you've never seen an organism evolve in real time. Like, we have. We've seen it both in the field and in the laboratory, right? There's a really good example. I think it was done at Berkeley or maybe UC San Jose. I know it was one of the California state schools. But they did an experiment with bacteria, E. coli specifically. And what they did was they took a table, and on each end of the table, they started an E. coli colony, right? And it was on like this giant table-sized petri dish, so that there was medium for them to grow on, right? And then they I think it was like couple of inches, they spread antibiotics on the table, and then they increased the concentration level of the antibiotics by 20% every line. And then you actually, when you look at it, you see an evolutionary tree of the bacteria, entire strands, entire families of these colonies dying off, but then one pushes through and makes it, and you get these E. coli that are eventually surviving all the way up into the 80%. Nothing made it through the 100% concentration, which was the center line, right? So, but like, you literally watching these E. coli evolve to survive antibacterial or antibiotic fields that they were growing on.
Wow.
And this is also why they say don't ever stop taking your antibiotics, because you end up creating these like super strains that are just resistant. Right? If you don't take your antibiotics, you'll just the only stuff that it will be left inside of you is the strongest shit. Right? But yeah, like, that is literally evolution in real time, observable.
Wow. How long did it take?
It was several weeks. Like.
But still.
Yeah.
Still in real time.
Yeah, exactly. It's still in real time. You're literally watching evolution happen in real time as these different strains of E. coli evolve to survive stronger and stronger antibiotic concentrations.
Wow.
That's fucking evolution. And in this case, it would be artificial selection, right? We created the circumstances for which those E. coli developed.
Right.
Right?
Right.
That's artificial selection. It wasn't just, this is how it is in the natural world, right? That would be natural selection. No, we created an artificial experiment, but it still demonstrates evolution in real time. It was just forced by us. But this is still the stuff that genetics does. It adapts to its environment, or it tries to. I shouldn't say tries to, because again, there is no goal. It's survival of the fittest. It's just simply the genes that, the traits that aid an organism in its ability to survive and reproduce are more likely to be passed on to future generations of a population.
Dave, I gotta take a piss break.
All right, we'll take a piss break. Ladies and gentlemen, we are having a bio break.
I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get up. No.
Well, we could also just save more of this for later if you want to call. We got a really nice chunk of conversation. Yeah, how about we save this? This is our first episode of Talking with Uncle Mike. If you liked what you saw, please like and subscribe. And we'll be putting out more of this. And Mike turned his mic back on, so I'm echoing. So you get to hear me twice tell you to smash that like and subscribe button, guys.